In today's video, we're taking a look, in my opinion, of the top 5 worst Toronto Maple Leafs trades, where the careless trading of draft picks have allowed other teams around the NHL to land star players and drastically alter the Leafs' future. We'll jump into those deals coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, today we're taking a look at what I feel are the top 5 worst Maple Leaf trades since 1990. So we're looking at quite a grand scope of period of time, but there's numerous occasions here where the careless trading of draft picks have landed star players to other teams. Now don't worry, I'm going to be doing similar videos for other teams as well. We're not picking on Toronto here, but it certainly goes to show that how a lot of teams kind of throw away draft picks and move them around carelessly sometimes, how those picks can turn out to be star players for other teams that are using them a little bit more wiser and putting them here to good use. It goes to show that teams really should be more careful with this stuff. And before we jump into the trade, I just wanted to make a quick moment here to talk about the post I had on my community tab here on YouTube, where I put out a post last night kind of teasing this video, asking which of these NHL goaltenders the Toronto Maple Leafs were directly responsible for helping other NHL teams acquire or draft. So find out in an upcoming video. I said the answers were Tuuka Rask, John Gibson, or Philip GRUBAUER. Obviously, most of you voted for Tuuka Rask, with a few voting for Gibson and GRUBAUER, so certainly watch all the way through so you find out. Now first up, we're going to go back to October of '89. Now I know I said here that this was the worst trade since 1990, but I'm including this one because the draft pick involved actually was the 1991 first round pick. But in October '89, the Leafs traded that pick to the New Jersey Devils in exchange for Tom Kurvers. Now, Kurvers was having a pretty decent career at this point, was known as a pretty good puck-moving offensive defenseman. He did put up 55 points over 89 games with the Leafs, but just a year and a bit that he was there. So obviously didn't have a long tenure with Toronto at all before being moved to Vancouver. So obviously Kurvers' better days were certainly behind him at this point. And they ended up the following year, the 90-91 season, they were just flat out bad. The Leafs had a terrible year and were second last in the league. And this pick ended up being third overall in the 91 draft. Only reason it was third and not second was because the San Jose Sharks were coming into the NHL and they were given the option of picking second. So the Leafs pick was third, and that pick ended up being Scott Niedermayer, number 3 overall to New Jersey. Had a Hall of Fame career, arguably one of the best defensemen ever really in the NHL. Well accomplished when it comes to Stanley Cups, gold medals. You know, he was one of the greatest defensemen of the modern era. He certainly would have drastically altered the Maple Leafs' future in so many ways if they held on to that pick, and if they would have been able to make that selection on their own. Can you imagine in the early 90s, especially think about the 93 conference finals, Toronto Maple Leafs versus the Los Angeles Kings, and Gretzky versus Gilmore. That was a heck of a series. The Leafs were really, really close. If they would have had Niedermayer in the mix as well, that could have been the difference maker and perhaps got them to a Stanley Cup. Next up, we're going to go to June of 2006, where then Leafs GM John Ferguson Jr. made a trade that many Leafs fans are well aware of and turned out to be absolutely horrendous, where he traded the rights to goaltender Tuuka Rask, who they had previously drafted, to the Boston Bruins in exchange for goaltender Andrew Raycroft. Now, Raycroft had a really solid rookie season, won the Calder Trophy, and obviously at this point, John Ferguson Jr. really was trying to solidify his goaltending of the future, but instead he gave it away, which was certainly not what he was looking to do. The Leafs also had Justin Pogge in their system, and between Pogge and Rask, he bet on Pogge being the better goaltender of the two. Well, I think most of us, at least that have been following the game for some time, know how that worked out. Justin Pogge only played a handful of NHL games, never worked out at all, and as we know, Tuuka Rask to this day is still the starting goaltender for the Boston Bruins. He's had a tremendous career, obviously was part of the 2011 Cup winning team with the Bruins, even though he wasn't the starting goalie at the time. He's got a Vezina Trophy under his belt and has cemented himself as being one of the better goaltenders of the last decade or more. So clearly, this is a trade that came back to bite him, especially in many of those times where we saw the Leafs and Bruins battle in playoff series. If only Tuuka Rask could have been on the other side wearing the other uniform. Next up, we jump ahead to September of 2009 when the Toronto Maple Leafs acquired Phil the Thrill Kessel from the Boston Bruins. Now, as much as Kessel had a good career and was a solid player for the Maple Leafs, he really wasn't the top star player that they really were trying to build around to get themselves to being a Stanley Cup winner. As we know, he went on to play a secondary complimentary role to Penguins, where he was much better suited. And even though he might not have had quite the level of personal success, the team overall was better, and Phil Kessel got himself some Stanley Cup championships. Now, ultimately, the Bruins ended up receiving 2 first-round picks, 2010 and 2011, as well as a 2010 second-round pick. Now, of course, some of you, like I said, are hardcore Leafs fans, probably know who these players turned out to be. Of course, in 2010, it was Tyler Seguin, and in 2011, it was Dougie Hamilton. So as much as Kessel would have been a good player for the Leafs for quite a while, don't you think they would have preferred to have Tyler Seguin, a top center iceman, and Dougie Hamilton, who had the potential to be a top pair D? And even though he's bounced around a little bit in his career, and we could certainly do another video later looking at trades that the Bruins made that might not have been smart, and obviously they moved both these guys away at a young age, but that's a topic for another day. But either way, like, the Maple Leafs would have been so much better off, in my opinion, with Seguin and Hamilton in their lineup. Next up, we're going to jump ahead to June 26, 2010 at the 2010 NHL entry draft. Now, this was a case of the Maple Leafs basically trading down. We see this happen quite a bit, where they look at the draft board and who's available, and like, yeah, you know what? There's nobody right there that we absolutely are in love with that we want to draft. We feel like whoever we want, we can get a little bit later. So let's try to trade down, get an extra pick, and see if we can get an extra asset. So ultimately, they moved the 4th round pick to the Washington Capitals, pick number 112, in exchange for pick number 116 and pick number 146. Well, the Washington Capitals put that pick to very good use. Pick number 112 turned out to be yet another goaltender that the Maple Leafs could have had in their system and been a starting goaltender for them, and that is Philip GRUBAUER. Now, of course, GRUBAUER went on to have a pretty solid career so far, mostly as a backup in Washington, later traded to the Avalanche, where he's now the starting goaltender today. But either way, yet another case of giving away a pick, which turned out to be a solid NHL player. And unfortunately for the Maple Leafs, both of the picks that they were able to retain did not turn out to be NHL players. So they gave away a starting netminder in exchange for 2 picks that never worked out. Now, next up, we move to 2011. There was actually technically 2 trades here. I'm kind of counting it as one because they're both of the draft and they both involved picks only, and it really turned out horribly wrong for the Maple Leafs while setting up the Anaheim Ducks with some really solid players. Now, first up, they wanted to move up in the draft, so they wanted to take 2 picks and trade for 1. So they got a hold of the Ducks and they traded pick number 30 and 39, which was a first and a second, in order to move up and get pick number 22 in the first round of the 2011 draft, so they could select Tyler Biggs, who we discussed recently as being one of the biggest draft busts of the past decade. Biggs was a player who never worked out at all. Well, like I said, one of the bigger busts for the Leafs in recent memory, and they also gave away other picks to move up and get him. So this is already going horribly wrong. So of course, on the second day of the draft, they traded a 2012 6th round pick in exchange for the 2011 6th round pick number 159. So on this day here, they ended up trading 3 different picks to the Ducks in exchange for 2. Obviously, the 2012 pick, they probably didn't see anything they wanted in the draft. So they said, you know what? We'll take this pick and trade it to the Ducks in exchange for 1 for next year. Maybe there'll be a player then that we prefer over these guys. Obviously, the Ducks put those picks to extremely good use. So not only did the Leafs picks not work out, but the Anaheim Ducks were then able to draft, first up, number 30 overall, RAKELL, who's been an excellent player for them. Second round pick, number 39 overall, goaltender John Gibson. Obviously, that worked out quite nicely. And in the 6th round, they got Josh Manson, one of their top defensemen. So clearly, would these picks not look much better right now in Leaf uniforms? Obviously, they had a starting goaltender issue for a long time before they traded with the Ducks again to acquire Freddie Anderson. So, of course, they could have had Gibson out of the get-go. Of course, RAKELL and Manson would have been put to good use as well. Looking at their blue line right now and some of the issues that they've had over the years, with a guy like Josh Manson, who's been a player that we've talked about numerous times in trade rumors, could have been a Leaf from the very beginning of his NHL career. So obviously they moved up to grab a bust, and in exchange gave away 3 solid NHL players. Now, I realize looking back, there's no way to know that was going to work out. But as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, it just goes to show sometimes we're a little bit too careless with draft picks, how it can really come back to bite you and set up other teams for superstar players coming out of the draft. As you can see, the answer to my poll question was all of the above. It was a little bit of a trick question. There was 1 or 2 comments that seemed to know that that was the case, but obviously many people knew about the Tuuka Rask deal because that was explicitly traded 1-for-1 with Andrew Raycroft, but obviously GIBSON and GRUBAUER were draft picks, like I said, in my opinion, were given away a little bit too carelessly, which could have resulted in them having other star goaltenders, of course, other great players that we discussed here today. So thanks for answering the poll. So of course, as always, we'll know your thoughts and opinions on these trades that we discussed here today for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Obviously goes to show that some of these star players could have become integral parts of the Maple Leafs future and could still be a big part of that future even today. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments and we'll continue the conversation. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss other future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.